it is a matter of losing weight, but underneath the umbrella of losing weight, you want to retain lean mass as much as possible, reasonably possible, and lose fat mass.
What would you say are the non-negotiables when it comes to losing belly fat? Obesity is a big problem today. Many people are struggling with overweight. When it comes to losing the belly fat, what would you say are some of the more non-negotiable tactics?
Okay, so I want to start with the reality that losing belly fat involves losing overall body fat. You cannot necessarily target belly fat without having the overarching objective to, okay, I'm just going to reduce total body fat. And of course, reducing belly fat is important for improving health and preventing disease, because visceral fat is one of the gateways to insulin resistance and the constellation of negative things that happens after that. And so essentially, to lose fat, for most people, you have to purposely impose a caloric deficit. And there are many roads to imposing the caloric deficit, whether it's quantitative and precise and purposeful, or whether it's by default just by choosing a certain set of foods that are more satiating and default you to eating less. But in one way or another, you have to end up essentially eating less or expending more energy, calories, through training. And typically, it has to be a combination of both. Especially if you're talking about the general public, who is in trouble and at risk for these sort of things like metabolic syndrome and that setup for chronic disease in the long term, you got to impose a caloric deficit. Now, I suppose the next thing that comes to mind is, well, what kind of caloric deficit are we talking about? Whatever caloric deficit will enable you to lose roughly 0.5% to a whole percent of your total body weight per week is realistic and actually fast if you lose a whole percent of your total body weight per week. So 0.5% of that is just fine.
And with more than that, do you risk losing muscle, or is that like what would be the potential risks of trying to lose weight, to lose fat faster?
That's a great question, and it's got a bit of a nuanced answer, since people with a lot of excess body fat to start off with, so people with obesity and high degrees of overweight, those populations have less of a risk of losing lean body mass with rapid fat loss or rapid weight loss. So more of their initial weight loss is going to come from body fat tissue, whereas the leaner you are, if you're normal weight to lean, if you're dropping weight quickly, then there is a higher risk of losing lean mass alongside of that. So with that kind of that benchmark of 0.5% to a full percent, or you can kind of make it more simple and think, okay, 1 pound or 2 per week. Those who lose a couple pounds a week, well, they better be in the overweight to obese category. Otherwise, they're going to be risking undue losses in lean mass versus the folks who are normal weight trying to push the envelope. Then, 1 pound, 0.5 pound a weekish is perfectly fine. But I want to add a little bit of a wrinkle there. Even if somebody is obese and they lose 0.5 pound of body fat per week, I mean, you're looking at like 24, 25 pounds a year that you're losing, which, I mean, 2-year period, you're losing 50 pounds. Spectacular.
Yeah.
Even at 0.5 pound a week. So there's nothing wrong with slow weight loss. There is some research showing that rapid initial weight loss in the obese population correlates with better long-term weight loss maintenance. But you got to take it on an individual basis.
Is it fair to say that if someone were to lose fat on a carnivore diet, on a vegan diet, on a paleo diet, on a low-fat diet, generally speaking, the mechanism is always going to be a calorie deficit? Is that accurate to say?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yep. And there's a little bit of a wrinkle there. Like when you take a population that is untrained, so novices, rank beginners straight off the couch, or people who are formally trained or deconditioned, and they happen to be carrying excess body fat, the phenomenon known as recomp, or simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain, can happen independently of an energy deficit. So if you have any one of those scenarios present at the outset of a program, then the whole calorie balance thing doesn't necessarily apply. But after that initial phase, and certainly if the goal is long-term substantial weight loss, you are looking at imposing a caloric deficit over time, sustaining it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be every day. It can just be a net deficit by the end of the week, because there is a lot of really interesting research showing non-linear dieting patterns where on most of the days you're not dieting, and on a couple of the days you're not eating or you're severely restricting, and then by the end of the week you incur a caloric deficit and then weight loss proceeds. So it's some pretty interesting stuff.
That is interesting. I've heard you on social media say that though calories in, calories out is the mechanism, right, for weight loss, that the adage to just eat less and move more fails as useful weight loss advice typically. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, it's because it's similar to, and I want to credit the right person for coming up with this. It could possibly be my bro Spencer Nadolski, but telling somebody to eat less and move more is akin to saying, "Oh, if you fall in the water, just don't drown." You know, and you tell that to somebody who doesn't know how to swim, then the advice doesn't work. Another analogy would be if you were to tell somebody, how do you get out of debt? Oh, well, you just save more and spend less. Psh, you know, what are you talking about? That's easy. Oh, how do I get rich? Oh, just make more and spend less. Just sustain that over time if you're rich. Not that easy, because there are many factors involved and there are many barriers, and there are specific skills people need and specific knowledge that people need in order to do this stuff correctly. And the same thing applies with losing fat, or in quotes, losing weight.
Yeah.
So it's really not a matter, it is a matter of losing weight, but underneath the umbrella of losing weight, you want to retain lean mass as much as possible, reasonably possible, and lose fat mass. And you want to be able to do that with a program that is sustainable from here on out. And so anybody can lose weight, but keeping it off is the tough part. And not everybody knows the mechanics, the programming variables involved with what am I supposed to do to keep muscle nutritionally and training wise? You know, what am I supposed to do rate of weight loss wise, which we just talked about, in order to keep muscle while losing fat? Because, you know, if you lose a lot of lean mass while you're losing body fat, then the body senses an energy crisis at the end of the rainbow. And this is actually in the literature, it's been called collateral fattening.
Whoa.
Where, yeah.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. There's an interesting body of literature on that. There's a couple good reviews on it, where if you're losing a bunch of meat along with the fat that you're losing, then your appetite is greater at the end of the dieting cycle, because your body does sense an energy crisis. We need to get this lean mass back, and so you're hungrier, and then rebound weight gain is more likely if you're losing a ton of lean mass.
Wait, was that the root cause of that whole like Biggest Loser phenomena?
It's one of them.
One of them.
It's one of them, yeah.
And if you can recap that for us, so what happened? They just went on these like really low calorie diets, right?
Yeah.
And they lost a bunch of weight, and then at the end of their dieting phase, they completely boomeranged and rebounded to their baseline weight, right? Is that not what happened?
Most of them, yeah. They, you know, when you put a huge cash prize at the end of however many weeks they had, what was it? I don't remember, number of months, right? They kind of do whatever it takes, and behind the scenes, you know, you read these columns and stuff, and you read these interviews with Biggest Loser contestants, and they took, you know, they took diet drugs alongside of just hours of cardio a day, and basically trying to eat the least amount necessary to kind of stay conscious. And so all of those factors are an absolute setup for just massive, rapid weight regain. Yeah, this is just a recipe for regain.
And going back to this phenomena that you described,
collateral fattening.
Yeah. So that occurs when you lose excess muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
While dieting.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we counter that? How can we diet and do our best to ensure that the weight that we're losing is coming predominantly from fat as opposed to muscle?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So going back to rate of weight loss, you're going to want to make sure that your caloric deficit is enough, but not too much. So caloric deficits that correlate with this 0.5% to a full percent body weight per week are right around 10 to 20 or so percent below your maintenance level. And for most people, that's going to be like 250 to 500-ish calories. Now, this is potentially different for obese populations. So obese populations, you can look at more aggressive caloric deficits, 20% all the way to 30-ish, 40% caloric deficit for maintenance. But for, let's just say, kind of the general-ish public who's not obese, 10 to 20% of a caloric deficit is a good starting point for programming. And it's a good way to be cautious enough so that you are losing body fat, but you're not losing an undue amount of lean mass in the process of losing body fat. And so that'll allow you that 1 to 2 pound drop per week. And once again, I want to emphasize that.
Sorry. Wow, faux pas.
Was that me?
That was me.
I was just happy it wasn't me because I've done that before.
Man. Sorry, guys. Okay, keep going. Not to distract you.
Yeah, no problems.
That actually doesn't normally happen. I don't know why. Anyway.
Well, this is special.
Yeah.
You know?
We're do it live.
Bleep. And so that 1 to 2 pounds of loss per week, and once again, that 0.5 pound of loss per week being perfectly fine, that would correlate with 10 to 20% of a caloric deficit below your maintenance needs. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you want to make sure that the deficit is enough, but not too much. And once again, for the obese population, 20 to 30% deficit is appropriate and will still allow them to retain lean body mass. And then the other two factors would be sufficient protein and resistance training. And, you combine that, the right level of caloric deficit with enough protein and progressive resistance training, and then you have the recipe for retaining muscle tissue while you lose fat.
I love that. I've heard you actually describe protein as a fat-burning nutrient, or at least you shared somebody's post on social media who asserted that protein is essentially a fat-burning nutrient. We've already established that you need to be in a calorie deficit to burn fat, but can you actually go so far as to call protein a fat-burning nutrient?
No, not really. In a very circuitous and indirect way, protein allows people to lose fat better. I mean, it has a higher cost of processing within the body than the other macronutrients. So technically, it's called the thermic effect of protein, or diet-induced thermogenesis. That happens to be higher in protein with the consumption of protein compared with the consumption of carbohydrate, and then with fat being in last place. It has the lowest thermic effect. So the body can much more easily store fat and a little bit less easily store carbohydrate, but it's much more difficult for the body to store protein because that's just how physiology works. With body fat, there's like an unlimited storage space. With carbohydrate, there's anywhere from 400 to 600 grams of glycogen you can carry in your body. There's not necessarily this pool of protein that you can just store. So it can get pretty complicated with that, but that's the basics.
And it's also like super satiating when you opt for higher protein foods, right?
That's the other part of it. Protein is in the majority of the literature, it's more satiating than carbohydrate or fat. Now you can point to literature where you're looking at foods that have a high water content and a high fiber content and not necessarily more protein than, let's say, like isolated source of protein, like protein powder or something like that. If you compare those foods, you're going to get similar satiating profiles in some of the literature. But generally speaking, protein is the most satiating macronutrient. And generally speaking, diets that if you match fiber between the diets, and you're going to see in the majority of cases significantly greater satiating effect with the higher protein diet compared to the lower protein diet.
I love that.
And this facilitates the control of hunger, the control of intake, and it makes the dieting process easier. It makes that restriction easier.
So, for example, like people that are on a carnivore diet that claim to have, never counted calories, is it safe to assume that the reason why many people lose fat on a carnivore diet is that a carnivore diet, because it's practitioners are eating primarily meat, which is obviously going to be high in protein, that it's a much more satiating diet?
Oh, yeah.
But it's not necessarily the exclusion of vegetables that has led to the weight loss, for example.
Yeah, that's right. It's a couple of things with the carnivore diet. Maybe potentially three things. So number one, yes, when you go on a carnivore diet, there will be a tendency to double or triple your previous protein intake. And so you are going to get the inherent satiating effect of protein. And then when you go on a carnivore diet or even something like keto, you reduce the option to consume hyperpalatable, easily passively consumed calories from these carb-fat combination, ultra-processed dessert-type foods. So with that off the table from carnivore, you're automatically going to have a lot less passive or mindless overconsumption of hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods. And then maybe the third element with carnivore is that you just have lower palatability of the diet overall because you have less variety of foods to choose from. So you're kind of cornered into essentially having this auto-regulation effect where you do get kind of bored of eating. If you never get bored of eating, you'll keep eating.
Yeah.
But with the carnivore meals, you get bored of it.
Yeah, well, it reduces the hedonic quality of food. If you were to navigate, if you were to just stroll the aisles of your average supermarket, which now I believe, according to a machine learning algorithm, is about 73% ultra processed. A lot of those foods are highly hedonic, right? Hyper palatable foods that just they push your brain to a bliss point beyond which self control is almost impossible.
Yep, that's very true.
Which is not to say that steak isn't hedonic. At least it is for me.
Yeah, right.
Right. But it's like these man-made, hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods tend to be like uniquely palatable to a degree that's, I think, not normally found in nature, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When people self-medicate with foods, they tend to gravitate towards these packaged, highly engineered snack foods and desserts. And people tend to not self-medicate with things like fresh fruit, vegetables, meats, and, high fiber stuff, and the typical clean, in quotes, clean fare. And so there is something about the neural reward response with ultra-processed snack foods and desserts that is just of a greater magnitude than you would get from, let's say, sitting there and eating a piece of meat.
Wow. And what are people typically self-medicating? Is there literature on this? Is it like...
Yeah. It's the stresses of life, boredom, and ritual is another thing that kind of comes into play. But like basically entertaining yourself with food.
Huh.
Yeah.
How do we, like, are there any practical ways that we can avoid doing that? I mean, it's something that feels on the one hand incredibly human, but on the other hand incredibly counterproductive to being healthy today.
Designate eating times to be eating times with kind of a limited number of people and a limited duration. Like there's some interesting research showing that when you're not eating by yourself, when you're eating with like a group of people in a social setting, you tend to eat more than if you were to just, be a hermit and eat by yourself.
Interesting.
There's also literature showing that if you're eating in a social setting, the longer you sit there with the group of friends or the party or whatever, the more everybody ends up eating. And so the moral of the story is not necessarily become a hermit and eat by yourself, but be kind of aware of the forces that subconsciously default people into eating more. And then there's the other factor of just being distracted and mindlessly eating. The embattled, great Brian Wansink, he did a lot of research on this. The mindless eating factor. Okay, so if you are sitting there watching Netflix with a bag of whatever it is, chips, freaking mini donuts or whatever, there will be a tendency for you to eat more versus just kind of knowing the task at hand, being aware, and not having the movie distract you while you're just sort of feeding your face unconsciously. Other factors that mitigate the mindless eating phenomenon is having the hyperpalatable, easily overconsumed foods in places that are out of visual sight, like and difficult to get to, like keep it up there in the cabinets, if not out of the house. And then you can proactively put the healthier stuff, the more satiating stuff, kind of front and center in your face, like have fresh fruit out there, so you'll have the tendency to grab it and consume that versus grabbing for the the ice cream sandwich or something.
I feel like food manufacturers are keenly aware of the fact that if something is at eye level, we're going to be more inclined to reach for it. I mean, that's why you go to the supermarket. Like all the most delicious, hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods they tend to be like right at eye level.
Oh yeah, in the line.
In the line of sight.
Waiting to pay.
Yeah.
You just see those Snickers bars there. You see that Snickers has dark now. You're like, whoa, I'm kind of hungry right now.
If you are prone to snacking at night, are there any snacks that are maybe higher volume, lower in calorie density that you might recommend?
Yeah, really. I think we have to break out of the mentality that snack foods have to be snacky and hyper palatable and delicious. I think that even like fresh fruit, okay, that'll work. Fresh fruit with some sort of protein source. Any number of dairy foods that are not butter. My personal favorite late night snack has been either oatmeal with whey in it.
Wait, oatmeal?
Yeah, oatmeal.
Oats. I thought oatmeal was peasant food, and it's.
You heard that here first, you guys. It's peasant food,
and it's slowly killing us.
Yeah, I believe it was either Confucius or the great Dave Asprey who said that oatmeal is peasant food. Right. So yeah, no, I'm totally down with peasant food.
For the record, I like that we're friends. I like Dave, but I eat oatmeal. I'm on board with oatmeal.
I hope that Dave hears this clip. I hope he does. I hope he has a sense of humor and he gets a laugh out of it.
Yeah, he does.
And so yeah, I'll do half a cup of oatmeal, and I'll microwave it up, add some milk, add a scoop and a half or so of whey protein, add a rounded teaspoon of peanut butter, just mix it up, man. That's freaking amazing. And I've found that it gives me, immortality and superpowers as well.
And the research on oatmeal, I mean, to be fair, it seems like a food that's beneficial to health more than it is not, right?
It is very difficult, if not impossible, to find unfavorable effects from oatmeal or oats, any kind of oat, really, oat products. I mean, with instant oats, those little packets, you can find research from way, way back, like late 90s, showing less satiating effects of instant oats versus steel-cut oats versus an egg-based breakfast, like eggs and fruit, basically. And that's kind of the long and the short of the negative effects of oats. You'll have to go, find something with instant oats where sugar has been added to it. And it's much more refined than the other options. But, just the regular old oats. Everything from clinical parameters, even glucose control, to improving blood lipids, all the way to body weight control. All of that stuff is positive. All of that stuff is favorable with oats. And cynical people would say, oh, well, who paid for that? Who paid for that stuff? Okay. Probably the oat industry. But then again, being involved with the research process and having done studies funded by industry, the last thing you want to do is spend 6 months to 2 years working on a freaking study and have a predetermined outcome going in, because, there's no money, there's no glory in this stuff. We just want to find out. We just want to know the truth. No scientist, no researcher does research thinking, I just got to get those checks from Big Protein or Big Oats. We just got to make sure it's up. No. It doesn't work like that. We have an a priori agreement with the funding source that you guys, you agree to pay for the study, stay hands off of the conception, the design of the study, the execution, data collection, data interpretation, decision to publish, stay out of that, and let's do this. And that's how it goes, and that's how it has gone with my colleagues and I. And so when somebody brings up, who funded the study? Well, dismissing research on the basis of funding source is a bias in and of itself. And if you were to do that, if you were to just say, oh, look at the funding source, let's ignore that research, well, then you would have to not cherry pick who you make that stand with.
Right.
You would have to say, okay, well, we got to throw out all the meat research funded by the meat industry. We got to throw out all the egg research. Heck, we might even need to throw out all that great olive oil, extra virgin olive oil research funded by the olive industry, and all the produce research funded by the produce industry, all the dairy research funded by the dairies, and then you have no science to look at. And when you realize that us lowly researchers, this is for the love. It's not for the money. It's for the love, because there's no freaking money in that.
Yeah, where else are you going to find the funding to study food?
Yeah, truly.
Like the NIH earmarks, I think, a certain budget for nutrition research, but it's like very high level. They're not looking at like individual food items, to my knowledge.
Yeah, right. It's rare if it happens at all. And with that said, there are certain setups that, okay, it might help to be extra wary of. Like, for example, if the lead researcher of a study owns the patent to the product or agent being tested in the study, and their company is funding the study. So that's one setup that you might want to be extra vigilant of. But if you're looking at a university that just gets an idea to study how, protein distribution impacts body composition, and it's funded by X or Y or Z supplement company, if you dismiss the research based on it being funded by industry, you're basically saying, well, that poor professor is colluding with big supplement or big protein in order to secure a certain result. So, it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've cited, I think, very useful research about almonds, for example, that was funded by the Almond Board doesn't negate the value of the research. A lot of the research that we have on the impact of, for example, berries on brain health are funded by the Blueberry Board, or I forget what the association is, but it's funded by, people who have a vested interest in promoting blueberries. Dark chocolate, cacao flavanols, right? I work with a brand called Cocovia, which I've been a huge fan of for years, almost like a decade at this point. But a lot of the research that we have looking at cocoa flavanols and their impact on cardiovascular health and brain health, funded by Mars. So that's not to say, I love what you said. It's not, because these studies are still, it doesn't invalidate the study for it to have been paid by somebody, for it to have gone through peer review and be, published in one of these like very legitimate journals. I think it's still, it speaks to the quality of the research more than anything else. Yeah,
very true. And if you were to try to bust somebody on, like pocketing money from the funding of studies, okay, show me the money trail, like where is it, especially in the food industry. And especially okay, with the pharmaceutical industry, I haven't done any of that research. Who knows? Maybe there's a little more wheeling dealing going on at the top. I don't know. But certainly with protein powders, with foods, with sports nutrition, with training, it's like, these are not massive, multi-conglomerate, like geopolitical giants who are trying to push an in quotes agenda. These are companies saying, "Hey, we got protein for you."
Yeah.
So it's like, cool. There's a ton of biological plausibility. Let's see how this goes.
Yeah, I hate that. On social media these days, like anytime you post any kind of study, it's like, well, who funded it? It's just like this like really vapid commentary or criticism. That it's like, well, if you want to know, like, if you want to actually assess the study itself, go read the study.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's so funny. But resistance training. So we were talking about. We went
off on a funding tangent.
Yeah, we did. How did we even get there? That was really funny. But we were talking about. We're talking about fat loss and we're talking about protein.
Yes. The three main things that would allow this saving of muscle and losing of fat to happen. We talked about rate of weight loss, make sure it's good, and make sure there's resistance training, make sure there's enough protein.
There you go. I love that. Well, resistance training is something that I love talking about because I love resistance training myself. I'm trying to get jacked. I've dedicated the past. I've been trying to get jacked since I'm 16, but I think like I've really worked hard to dial in my training over the past year specifically. And one of the things I love about resistance training is that, there's so many things that I love about it, but it makes me feel more confident, makes me look better, it makes me stronger. But you've actually gone so far as to call it a fountain of youth.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
So in order to live as long as possible, you have to be as mobile and functional as possible from a musculoskeletal, orthopedic, and metabolic standpoint. And the beginning of that is being able to train the muscles properly. Being able to do that is beginning to, move those bones. And really, resistance training is a non-negotiable. And it is the fountain of youth in the sense that it is what primarily will enable you to keep your metabolic engine, which is your skeletal muscle. And that's kind of the nutshell of why it's so important. And I actually came across, as I was doing my research review, I came across a recent publication that is titled, so this was, I believe this was done in May, or sometime this year. It's titled Nutrition and Exercise Interventions to Improve Body Composition for Persons with Overweight or Obesity Near Retirement Age. So this is a systematic review and network meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. And so their conclusion was, overall, the most effective strategy for nearly all the outcomes examined is energy restriction with resistance training or mixed exercise combined with high protein. So you want resistance training there as a non-negotiable. There can be cardio in there, but first and foremost, resistance training or resistance training and aerobic training. All of this stuff combined with high protein, that's what improves these health outcomes in retirement age folks with overweight or obesity.
Wow.
And so this was a conglomeration of 92 studies that looked at it. It's this recent thing. I think it's the largest study of its kind on these outcomes. And that's literally what they boiled it down to, was freaking resistance training and high protein. And high protein is, it can be pretty subjective, because in the literature, they think anything like from 1.1 or 1.2 grams per kilogram and up is high protein. So
that's like just above the RDA.
It's kind of just above the RDA, like 30 to 50% above the RDA. They'll call it high protein.
Interesting. What would you say to somebody who may be listening to this? I mean, this show reaches people across the age spectrum, but maybe they're in their 60s. They've never resistance trained before, and they're thinking to themselves, either resistance training is something for bros, like us, or that it's too late.
Okay. Oh man, there is research showing that people in their 80s and above, like 85ish and up, they grow muscle almost just as efficiently as younger people do when you just initiate a resistance training program. So number one, it's never too late unless you're dead, at which point it's difficult to train. Unless you're, in the pearly gates training with the cherubs and the harps. Who knows what that's like? We're all definitely going to know at one day.
At some point, yeah.
But unless you're dead, you can resistance train. And it doesn't have to be full body, lower body. You don't have to be crossfitting. You can start, low and slow. A minimum effective dose for initiating or maintaining hypertrophy is pretty low, dude. It's pretty low. There's some really great research and some really great narrative reviews out of my friend Brad Schoenfeld's lab and Gurgic's lab, where roughly 3 to 6 sets per muscle group per week for the whole freaking week, minimum effective dose, you can cause and maintain a reasonable, healthy amount of hypertrophy. So, and strength.
And hypertrophy is muscle growth, right?
Yes, it's muscle growth. So when you look at that minimum effective dose to start off with, and for some people to even maintain, if you really hate the idea of resistance training, then it's all really doable. It's all really doable. Now, you won't necessarily be able to maintain a high level of muscle hypertrophy, but you'll still be able to maintain enough for reasonable health. So, but most people, who get into training and wanting to become fit, then typically you are going to be going beyond that resistance training volume of 3 to 6 sets per muscle group per week. You'll probably end up hovering more around the 5 to 10, 6 to 12 sets per muscle group per week to kind of reap the full benefits of gaining higher degrees of fitness and strength and muscle hypertrophy. You can look at it this way. Muscle on your bones is like money in the bank.
Ooh.
Especially when it comes to the aging process, because at people's third decade of life, that's when the sedentary shift starts happening. That's when you're kind of well done with college and you're well settled into the cubicle. And that's when people just stop using their muscles, right around 30-ish. And then this process just stays that way, and muscle loss really starts accelerating when people hit 40 and especially 50. I've come across some really sort of alarming rates of muscle loss, like 1 to 2% a year after starting from the age of 50, hypertrophy and strength loss at 1 to 2% a year. And then once you hit 60, it can be as high as 3% a year as far as muscle and strength losses go, and it is just a downward spiral. And yes, we are meant to die at some point. We are meant to lose a certain amount of muscle at some point. But the game of fighting father time is fun and very rewarding, because you increase your quality of life while you're still around on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks to be old and frail. We're all going to get old, right? But if you can be old, which you're hopefully, like getting to be old is actually a privilege as well. And I don't want people to forget that.
Right.
Not everybody gets to make it to old age. But if you're able to make it to old age and maintain your robustness and your resilience, I mean, then you really are winning, especially today.
Yes, no doubt about it. And I have a especially passionate view of fighting father time with proper nutrition and resistance training, because I watched my dad become immobile after surgery and lose his appetite after major surgery and become wheelchair bound. And he lasted another 2 or 3 years, and that was it.
Wow.
Yeah. Whatever you can do to maintain your mobility, your strength, and your presence of mind to eat properly, that is really just so foundational to maintaining good quality of life as the pearly gates get closer and closer.
So wait, he had a surgery and his appetite changed for good as a result of the surgery?
Yeah. Just kind of recalling the day that the family gathered together, and I think it was my mom who said, okay, we were not going to tell you guys this, but my dad had an aortic aneurysm. And so the aortic artery is this big old tree trunk of a vessel that goes all the way down through the heart, and the lungs come through the kidneys, everything just straight down the middle. And the surgery involves going in there, like filleting you like a fish, basically, and then putting a reinforcement around this kind of swelling that could burst. And my dad had he was given the choice whether or not to do the surgery. And my dad's like, just do the surgery. I'd rather do that than just walk around thinking at any day now my aortic artery could burst and I could be done with. A lot of people don't know that they have an aortic aneurysm, and there's a certain amount of deaths that occur through that, and people just think, kind of had a heart attack. But my dad was already in his early 80s, 82 or 83 or so, when he was diagnosed with an aortic aneurysm. And
was he a smoker?
He was a smoker in his youth, heavy duty. Lots of smoking, lots of drinking, lots of hard living.
Yeah.
And and he was my dad was overweight for most of his life. Yeah, I mean by BMI standards, he was obese for most of his adult life. And so he decided to have the surgery. We kind of didn't want him to have the surgery. He was already like 82, 83. We're like, man, imagine having to deal with the recovery from that. And the surgery itself had, some degree of risk of not going well. But that's what he wanted. And so we're like, well, ultimately it's his choice. So he got the surgery. They cut him from like collarbone to pubic bone. Jeez. Literally, it's just this freaking gnarly cut from here to here. And they, reinforced that aortic artery. And from that point, he lost his appetite. Everything he ate made him nauseous. I'm not sure whether it had to do with disrupting the neural networks in the gut. They literally had to cut through everything. And they did have to, and lost his appetite. Because he lost his appetite, he got frail very quickly. And he lost his mobility within a year of the surgery. And then he became wheelchair bound. And that was kind of it. He just sort of deteriorated from that point. A really cool part of him leaving us, leaving humanity, was that we were able to kind of get the call that my dad was not doing very good, And so everybody just dropped everything, went over to the hospital he was staying at. And we had like literally about a dozen family members around him. And he was in the hospital bed. And I kid you not, dude. I kid you not. He went like this. He pointed to himself. He's all. Basically saying, okay, I'm going to go now.
Yeah, I'm just
And
like,
he had his full family around him. We got a chance to tell him how much we love him. And it was incredible.
wow.
It was freaking incredible. I mean, if there was one way to go, I mean, the lead point to that was not ideal, but how he was actually able to go at the point that he left was incredible. And a few months before that, he was in the hospital, and one of the nurses came in, and I was there with him, and she said, You're Alan Aragon.
No. She was a fan?
She was a fan. She's like, oh my gosh, I love your stuff. You're Alan Aragon. And my dad got to see that.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was one of the freaking best moments possible, you know? And
Wow.
so I digressed a little bit, but moral of the story is I got to see the consequences of immobility, undernutrition, and this involved an obvious lack of enough calories, enough protein, and enough resistance training to maintain our metabolic engine or muscle tissue. So once the musculoskeletal system goes, then you do not have the conductor of the big band to move those joints, move the bones, and even do the cardio to maintain health. So yeah.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that about your dad. I mean, I definitely have a story, you know, like of profound illness in my family, and that's what's motivated my life's work. And I know it's so hard to go through.
Yeah.
But to be able to go through that and to come out on the other side with insight, you know, that you can then use to better your life and the lives of those around you. I mean, that's, you know, what that adds up to is that experience and the suffering and the trauma not being in vain, which I think is the best that we can hope for, right? Because at the end of the day, we all are on that moving walkway towards decrepitude and ultimately death.
For sure. I look at it like a game. Or really, like it's not a game. But yeah, it kind of is a game. It is a battle between you and Father Time, and you kind of win your way through until the end when you both agree that it's time to go. So,
Man, there was a review that you wrote. I sent you this. It was a consensus paper on the potential value for essential amino acids.
yeah.
So the reason why I'm bringing it up is because, do you think that for people who are, you know, who have no appetite, like that you know, an essential amino acid supplement might be valuable because you get to consume essentially very little in terms of volume, but you're compensating essentially for the fact that your dad was on like a low protein diet at the end of his life?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question because there's a bunch of gray area in the literature that is ripe for investigation. And that is this. So essential amino acids, the 9 essential amino acids in isolation, free amino acids, if you can isolate them, get them in a supplement or whatever. Just a few grams of it has an equivalent anabolic effect at the muscle level. So muscle protein synthesis, the muscle protein synthetic response to protein or amino acid feeding is, for the listeners, it's a short-term proxy for what might over time, or what does over time, result in muscle growth. So this is just taking a couple steps back. So muscle growth is the net result of muscle protein synthesis being greater than muscle protein breakdown over time. So net muscle protein balance being in the positive over time is what results in muscle growth. And so essential amino acids, free essential amino acids, have this very, very strong anabolic response, this very strong muscle protein synthetic response. And the research that we have right now doesn't answer the question, can we put somebody on a low protein diet? Let's imagine an elderly subject who has, for example, dysphagia. Sarcopenic dysphagia is an unfortunate consequence of getting older for a lot of people. And that means that you have an impaired ability to consume foods, especially solid foods. There can be chewing issues, swallowing issues. Dysphagia is an impairment of ingesting foods. And so what happens when somebody has some degree of dysphagia as an older person, then eating that piece of chicken or that piece of steak or even that, piece of corn, for my vegans out there, QUORN, or eating that seitan, right? Simon Hill, you hearing me?
The vegans.
There is some potential utility for potentially going beyond supplementing with the whey protein powder and just going straight to the essential amino acids and eliciting that robust anabolic response that you're not getting from your whole intact, and certainly your whole intact and solid protein foods that are difficult for the older populations to eat. So in theory, you can supplement the diet with essential amino acids and produce an equivalent muscle growth or muscle retentive effect as a higher protein diet that is not supplemented with essential amino acids. But we just don't have that study around right now. What I'd love to see is, for example, if we run one group consuming 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, like the sort of golden, the golden ceiling of what helps with muscle growth and what's good for muscle retention and where health and body comp improvements converge. That's about 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 0.7 grams per pound for the Westerners.
Yeah, that's what I aim for every day.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. So we would compare that with the RDA, which most of the elderly population consumes by default. So the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is not enough. Not enough for anything, any of the endpoints that we strive for, retaining muscle, optimizing metabolic health. It's not enough for any of those things. But if we can supplement that RDA diet with essential amino acids to the tune of, 20 grams, 30 grams a day, let's see. If there is an equivalent muscle retentive effect as the 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, that would be a really interesting experiment to run because it would have potential utility for folks who just can't get that kind of protein in.
So there's like a hypothetical formula, right, by which 5 grams of essential amino acids is hypothetically equivalent in terms of its muscle protein synthetic effect of but it's like 10 times. It's like 10 times that in terms of gram. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's like there is a hypothetical multiplier, right?
Yeah. There's some recent research done by I believe it was Park and colleagues, or Kim or Park, a very Korean sounding name. I think just Kim or Park.
Those are the two most
They
Korean
are the
last
two.
names.
Shout out to my 3 Korean audience members out. So shout out to all 3 of you. One of them being my wife. And it was really interesting because a 3 to 6 gram dose of essential amino acids elicited an equivalent muscle protein synthetic response to, I want to say 10 or 12, all the way up to 20-ish to 25 grams of whey.
Wow.
So we're looking at potentially a 2 to 3 times.
2 to 3 times.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah,
wow.
At least in the recent literature. So, but then again, that's no guarantee that that short-term muscle protein synthesis response is going to translate to this net gains in muscle protein over time with resistance training and all that. There's a lot of research now showing that if you do get 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, or 0.7 grams per pound, then additional amino acid supplementation on top of that it doesn't do anything.
Right.
However, if you can't hit that 1.6 for whatever reason,
Yeah.
then maybe there's a spot for EAA supplementation. Another thing that I want to say, I would like to see research stacking essential amino acid supplementation on top of 1.6 in highly trained athletic subjects, because the research as it stands right now, you're either looking at branch chain amino acid supplementation on top of 1.6, which didn't do anything, or just leucine on its own on top of 1.6, which didn't do anything for increases in size and strength gain. But what if you stacked EAAs on top of that? I don't know. Maybe the bros might want to know. So
I want to know. Yeah. Why not?
yeah.
But that is pretty cool that you can consume, hypothetically, 3 grams of essential amino acids and get the muscle protein response
Of like 10 grams of protein.
of like 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there value? I've heard that you want with each meal, with each protein bolus, you want to hit at least 2.5 grams of leucine per bolus. Is there any value in that, or is it ultimately about your total daily protein intake?
With the older population, it is kind of about distribution and try to get the highest anabolic response out of each meal.
Yeah.
Because they have a tendency to only eat like 1 to 2 substantial amounts of protein a day, and it's like, and then they always fall short of total daily. So it is about total daily protein.
Yeah, like my dad is 73, and he'll go for hours. Like his breakfast is like a croissant and like a glass of juice.
Yeah.
And then he won't eat anything else until dinner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's unfortunately that is a common scenario with older adults. In theory, if you can get each meal like to be at least to contain 2 grams of leucine, and you can get that going at a minimum of 3 times per day, then you you're doing what we can to hedge against the onset and the progression of sarcopenia. There's an argument to be made to push that threshold even higher for older adults because they have a phenomenon called age-related muscle anabolic resistance, where they are less receptive to protein feedings in terms of the muscle protein synthetic response. So, and this has been shown in a number of studies where young trainees, their muscle protein synthesis response maxed out at like 20 to 25 gram protein doses. Whereas in order to get the equivalent muscle protein synthesis response in older people, you got to jack up the protein dose to 35 to 40 grams. So that 40 gram dose of protein is going to have like, more than 3 grams of leucine, close to 4 grams of leucine. So with the older population, their leucine threshold to max out muscle protein synthesis is like double the amount that it is for the younger population. And there is another wrinkle there I could confuse everything I just said with, but okay, well, why don't I do that? I believe it was 2016, McNaughton and colleagues, they compared a 20 gram dose with a 40 gram dose of protein in young subjects, except this time they hit them with a high volume, full body resistance training exercise bout before they fed the protein. So taking a couple steps back, your body is more receptive and has a greater anabolic response to protein when you're in the post-exercise state. Okay, so prior knowledge was that young people have this max of 20, 25 grams of protein where muscle protein synthesis plateaus. But then McNaughton and colleagues said, you know what? In all this research, they gave them like 8 sets of like leg extensions, or 4 sets of leg extensions, 4 sets of leg presses, and then they fed them the protein dose. Why don't we hit these people with 20, I believe it was over 20 sets total for the training bout, and let's compare 20 and 40 grams in young subjects. And so what they did effectively was change the paradigm and change our thought of what is the maximal anabolic protein dose for young folks, for young adults, actually. We used to think it was 25 grams. Now the 40-gram dose beat the 20-gram dose as of McNaughton et al. I honestly can't remember whether it's 2014 or 2016. Maybe it's 2016. And so that leads me to speculate that, you know what, maybe there's a even higher ceiling for older adults if we hit them with high volumes of resistance training, meaning it's higher than the originally thought of, the 40-ish gram dose being the limit. So, yeah, like I said, I was going to confuse the whole thing, and I did, but let me try to pull it back here. With the older population, it by default is about protein distribution because they have a tough time getting the number one thing of importance, which is the total by the end of the day. So the hierarchy of importance would be total by the end of the day, and then second in importance in the hierarchy is distribution of that total. And so, but the thing is, they're interrelated because people can't seem to hit the total without focusing on, okay, I need to get 30 grams of protein or so at breakfast, and then another 30 at lunch, and then I can try to do my 60 at dinner with a nice banger of a dinner, like people always do. Like the elderly population always is able to have a substantial amount of protein at dinner, but at breakfast protein is almost non-existent. At lunch it's kind of chintzy. You get this 3-ounce piece of meat at wherever you go, and you get like, I don't know, not a whole lot. And then finally at dinner you have your anabolic bolus. If they can just beef up the protein at one of those earlier meals, it'll go pretty far.
Wow.
Towards optimizing things.
Wow. That's really good to know, really helpful. Okay, so I have a question, and it's probably going to sound really stupid, like a really stupid question, but no question is stupid.
No.
On the Genius Life. So if you are eating a midday protein snack and you're not it's a 10 gram, we'll say a 10 gram protein snack, right?
Okay.
Like a piece, like a beef stick, 10 grams of protein. You're obviously not getting 2.5 grams of leucine, right? At most, you're getting 1 gram of leucine, maybe. Yeah. Does that mean that those 10 grams of protein are like not to be counted or useless, not having an effect, or what?
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. That opens up a whole other discussion.
Because at the top of the hierarchy, I would assume that it's still about ultimately total grams of protein over the course of the 24-hour period. Yeah.
If you get your total grams of daily protein nailed by the end of the day, I think you've won 90% of the battle.
Okay.
95% of the battle. So eking out that last 5-10% would mean getting the distribution right and maximizing muscle protein synthesis per meal. And my colleague, my friend Brad Schoenfeld and I, we actually have a paper on this, like how much protein per sitting maximizes the anabolic response. So there's a difference between how much protein you can have per sitting without it going to waste. There's really no limit to that. You can sit there and eat 200 grams of protein in the form of just a pile of meat or whatever. Your body will take all day to digest, absorb, utilize. There's a multiple sphincter system that is throughout the gastrointestinal tract that regulates the flow of nutrients in and out the body. So you're never going to be able to eat 100 grams of protein and 200 grams of protein and bam, it just shows up in circulation, then it gets leaked out your ears and disappears. That it doesn't work that way. But interestingly, there is a limit to how much muscle protein synthesis can occur per protein feeding. And that limit, based on just pouring through the literature, it appears to be right around 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. This is the per meal maximum of protein that hits that ceiling for muscle protein synthesis. In imperial terms, that's right around like 1/4 of a gram per pound of body weight. And so what you would want to do is just literally try to max out the anabolic response per meal if you wanted to, if your main concern was optimizing distribution of protein, and then you would do that 4 times a day. So 0.4 to 0.55, rounded up to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. That would be the protein dose per meal, and you run that four meals for the day, and then you hit this kind of golden total, which is ultimately the goal, is to get that total.
Which is, again, 1.6 grams
1.6, and I would say all the way up to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, and people get bent out of shape whenever you go over 1.6. I wouldn't be afraid to push it up to a full gram per pound, because the benefits are there, especially for dieting situations, and the downsides are kind of non-existent.
So if I'm gonna eat a protein snack, I should ensure that I'm getting at least 25 grams of protein.
That would be a good guideline.
Good guideline.
That would be a good guideline. But
and if I'm only able to get under that, or if I'm not hungry enough to eat those 25 grams, then am I better off not eating any? Like reaching for a piece of fruit instead?
No. So when we're looking at this ideal distribution of protein through the day, 0.4 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight over the course of 4 feedings.
Yeah.
Really, we're looking at a goal of maximizing muscle growth. Maximizing muscle retention is a different game. It doesn't require that much finagling. So muscle retention, it's almost like, okay, hit the total. Honestly, if you get it through like as low as 2 meals, potentially 1, hey.
So it's still going to be useful to maintain your muscle.
Yes.
But if you really want to maximize your hypertrophy, which your boy is, damn it. So you really should be. It's a missed opportunity. Then you should try to hit that like 25 gram mark.
It is. It kind of goes like this. You think of it like this. So throughout the course of the day, you have opportunities to spike muscle protein synthesis. So muscle protein synthesis is going to be one side of the equation. There's muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. The more frequently you can have these micro anabolic events, then you can max them out. Then in theory, over a period of weeks and months, you'll reach your muscle growth goals faster. And so, and I also want to bring it back to this. If let's say you only do that twice in the day, let's say you only do that once a day, but you are hitting 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, you didn't lose out on too much, but you didn't eke out that last 5 to 10%. Yeah.
Because there was a window in that day where you were spending more time in muscle protein breakdown as opposed to muscle protein synthesis?
Yes. I mean, they're happening cyclically and simultaneously. But you won't get that greater net balance of muscle protein synthesis to the same degree with having, maxing out MPS in 1 meal versus maxing it out in at least 3 meals. See, our 4-meal model is sort of pie in the sky, and not everybody can do it. And not only that, we just, we literally don't have the research comparing 3 protein feedings with 4 protein feedings or 5 or 6 protein feedings. We don't have the research. Nobody wants to do it because there's no product to sell. There's no way to recoup the funds, right? And I'm kind of kidding about that. And so that research might never be done unless I can convince Brad or Bill Campbell that, hey, I want to do a 3 versus 4 meal thing, or a 2 versus 5 meal thing, or who knows? Let's compare 3, 4, and 6 meals. That'd be pretty cool. Let's see what happens. Resistance trained subjects, optimized total daily protein, a nice 10 to 20% caloric surplus to facilitate these escalations in training volume, and optimize everything for hypertrophy. And let's see whether protein meal frequency, protein distribution makes an impact. Let's see whether 3 is better than 2, or 4 is better than 6, or 6 is better than 4, that sort of thing. I don't think that research is going to get done anytime soon, but right now the theory, I would say for the vast majority of the population trying to gain muscle, I wouldn't go below 3 protein feedings en route to that total for the day.
Yeah, it's music to my ears because I generally eat 4 meals, 3 meals a day. And then so I eat something generally small, like a 500 calorie meal hitting roughly 45 grams of protein soon after I wake up these days. Mm-hmm. And then I'm about an hour after that, typically heading to the gym. And then around noon, I eat like a big lunch, like 8 ounces of steak or chicken or whatever, mm-hmm. broccoli maybe, or a salad, but always like, again, another 40-gram bolus of protein.
Good. Mm-hmm.
And then usually a couple hours after that, like 4 p.m., I eat another 30, 40 grams of protein, a couple packets of beef jerky or some venison sticks or whatever. And then I know that I've got my dinner time at like 6, 7 o'clock where I'm going to eat 40, 50, maybe 60 grams of protein.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. How long has it been since I've been here?
It's been like 8 months, maybe 6 to 8 months, something like that.
I'm going to guess that you have put on a few pounds of muscle since I last saw you. Am I wrong or am I right?
You're right.
How many pounds?
Does that look to be the case?
Absolutely does.
I love it.
So how many pounds of meat did you put on?
I put on, I think I put on like 5-6 pounds.
Okay.
If not, I don't know. Is that like that could be an overestimate, but I think like around 5 pounds. I got really lean at the beginning of this year. I got down to like 176 pounds, 9% body fat at 176 pounds. Mm-hmm. And then I did like a little bit of a bulk. Like I reversed out of that and I bulked up to about 190 pounds. Uh-huh. Still staying fairly lean. And now I'm down to about 185.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've net gains of muscle.
Net gains of muscle.
See, that's the thing. Like I noticed that. And so what you're doing is working, period. So congrats.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
That means a lot coming from you.
For sure. You earned it.
Yeah. I remember the first time you were here, you were like, I don't know, I can tell, man. You're a bro.
My brodar.
Yeah, your brodar.
I had very strong brodar. So, yeah.
And it lit up.
Highly tuned.
Yeah, highly tuned. I love it. Well, definitely you can keep trusting that thing because you're right. And you've got fantastic taste in watches.
Oh, we have an identical watch.
We do. Yeah, yeah. Love it. The sub.
The connoisseurs will know.
Yeah. So great. People tag us like on social media, right?
Yes, they do. Yes,
They'll be
they
like Max and Alan.
Yeah.
They got good taste in watches.
Oh man. Yeah.
And they're both brotastic.
Men of culture.
Men of culture. Yes. Indeed. Well, dude, thanks for coming in. We got another banger under the books.
Oh, loved it.
Of course, man. Where can people find you on social media? And I know you put out this wonderful research review. How often do you put that out?
Once a month.
Once a month.
And I've been doing it since January of 2008.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's where all the gray hairs come from.
That's where all the gray hairs come from.
And that's why my hair isn't quite as thick as yours.
I actually found a really great new shampoo that I've been using.
Oh, okay. Well, you got to send me the link.
Yeah, if you need a good recommendation. I found out about, I forget where I found out about it, but it's called like Intelligent something. Zero affiliation, but it's like a thickening shampoo, and I've just been using it. I feel it, it doesn't dry out my hair, but I don't shampoo my hair every day. I shampoo it like, we're way off topic, but like twice a week maybe. I think it's good to let your natural oils, whatever. But anyway, so where can people find out and support and connect with you and follow you and check out all the great things that you're up to?
Yes, it's alanaragon.com. And as you mentioned, I have a monthly research review, which that's my baby. That's what I've been that's what's taken over my existence for the last 16 years. My research review is the one that influenced all the other research reviews in the industry, and all of them are great because they're all done by my students and colleagues. I created some monsters. My children have grown up right now, and they're doing amazing. So my research review, and also wrote a book over a year ago now.
Yes, it's a phenomenal book.
Yeah, flexible dieting.
Yeah, we have it downstairs.
And that's something that I would highly recommend. It was a labor of love. Yeah, that's about it. You'll be able to find me mostly. My largest platform is Instagram, so my handle is the Alan Aragon, and I'll occasionally go on Twitter and occasionally go on Facebook as well. But yeah,
love it. Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.